In 722 BC, 10 entire tribes of Israel walked into the historical record as a nation, and never walked out. No war ended them. No plague. They simply stopped appearing in history, and no one has ever fully explained where they went. This is not a story about a single battle lost. It is a story about a people erased so thoroughly, so deliberately, that entire nations today still argue over who, if anyone, is actually descended from them. 10 tribes. Whole territories. Hundreds of thousands of people. And by the time the dust settled, they were gone from scripture, gone from record, gone from memory. To understand how a nation disappears, we have to go back to the kingdom itself. After King Solomon's death, Israel split in two, the smaller southern kingdom of Judah, centered on Jerusalem, and the larger northern kingdom, simply called Israel. The northern kingdom held 10 of the 12 tribes. It was richer, more populous, and for 2 centuries it stood as a real regional power, with its own kings, its own capital, its own armies, and its own uneasy relationship with the great empires rising to its east. But scripture is blunt about why its ending came. The book of 2 Kings says the northern kings led the people into idolatry, worship at forbidden shrines, practices scripture calls a betrayal of the covenant itself. And looming over all of it was an empire that showed no mercy to rebellion, Assyria. For years the northern kingdom paid heavy tribute to Assyria just to survive. Then its king gambled everything, stopped paying, and reached out to Egypt for help instead. Assyria's answer was total, uncompromising war. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser besieged the northern capital, Samaria, for 3 long years. When it finally fell, his successor Sargon II claimed something staggering in his own royal records. He deported 27,290 people from the city alone. That single number is only the beginning of the strangeness, because the record itself tells us exactly where they were taken. And those places are stranger than you'd expect. Scripture names them precisely: Halah, the river Habor, the region of Gozan, and the cities of the Medes. Not vague exile. Specific, real, documented places deep inside the Assyrian Empire, hundreds of miles from home. Archaeologists have actually found tablets from Gozan, in what is now northern Syria, that name deportees living and working there under Assyrian rule generations later, real people with real jobs in a real foreign land. So the tribes did not vanish into thin air. We can trace, with real documents, exactly where the Assyrian Empire put them. And yet, within a few generations, they stop appearing as a distinct people anywhere in the record. That is the real mystery, not where they were taken. What happened to them once they got there? To understand that, you need to understand how Assyria conquered, because it did not just defeat nations. It dismantled them on purpose. Assyrian policy was not simple slavery. It was calculated demographic engineering. Conquered elites were deported far from home, and foreign populations were moved in to replace them, breaking any possible base for future rebellion before it could form. Scripture confirms the other half of this policy directly. The Assyrian king brought people from Babylon, Cutha, and other conquered cities, and settled them in the now empty towns of Samaria, filling the vacuum the deportations had left behind. Those newcomers intermarried with the Israelites who remained in the land, the poor, the farmers, the ones not worth deporting, and their descendants became a new mixed people, the Samaritans. So even inside the land itself, the old northern kingdom's identity was being deliberately diluted, and for those taken away, the erosion was faster still. Deportees were usually scattered in small groups, not resettled together as intact communities, surrounded by foreign languages, foreign gods, and foreign neighbors, cut off entirely from their temple and their ancestral land. The ordinary mechanisms that keep a people's identity alive simply had nothing left to hold onto. Mainstream historians today largely agree, within 2 or 3 generations, most of the exiled Israelites assimilated into the wider Mesopotamian and Median populations around them, and stopped existing as a separate, recognizable people at all. That is the sober, unglamorous answer. But it has never satisfied everyone, because a story about a vanished nation is exactly the kind of story people cannot leave alone. For 2,000 years, one group after another has looked at their own traditions and asked, could we be them? Could our ancestors be the ones who disappeared? Consider the Pashtun people, tens of millions strong today across Afghanistan and Pakistan. Their own oral tradition holds that some clans descend from a figure they call Afghana, a name tradition links directly back to the exiled tribes of Israel. Outside observers over the centuries have pointed to certain Pashtun customs said to echo ancient Israelite practice, and some clan names that sound, to some ears, strikingly biblical. But serious historians and geneticists have tested this claim directly, and the evidence has simply not held up. Genetic studies of Pashtun populations show no clear signal connecting them to ancient Israelite ancestry. A compelling tradition, a resonant name, but not, so far, a provable bloodline. And that pattern, powerful story, thin evidence, repeats again and again as this search continues. Now travel 5,000 miles east, into the hill country of Manipur and Mizoram in northeast India, and the claim suddenly gets considerably harder to dismiss. A community called the Bnei Menashe, meaning children of Manasseh, one of the 10 lost tribes, holds a detailed oral tradition of ancestors who migrated for centuries through Central Asia and China before settling in these hills. In the 20th century, a local leader had visions urging the community to reclaim its ancient identity, and thousands began formally studying and practicing Judaism, believing they were returning to a faith their ancestors had been forced to abandon centuries before. Israel's own chief rabbinate examined the community's traditions and, in 2005, formally recognized the Bnei Menashe as descendants of the tribe of Manasseh, opening the door for thousands to emigrate. Genetic studies here are more complicated than a simple yes. Some analyses have found no distinct Middle Eastern genetic marker at all. Others point to shared maternal lineages that could hint at ancient contact along old trade and migration routes. The genetics do not prove a tribe, but thousands of people crossed the world on the strength of a memory alone, and that memory has now been officially, if partially, honored. Travel again, this time to the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, and you find a Jewish community whose story is older, and whose claim is subtly different from the 10 lost tribes altogether. The Beta Israel, Ethiopia's native Jewish community, trace their own origins not to the northern tribes deported by Assyria, but through older traditions tied to the tribe of Dan, or to the legendary union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. For centuries they practiced a form of Judaism preserved almost entirely outside contact with the rest of world Jewry, following the written law with striking faithfulness, unaware of, or unshaped by, developments elsewhere. In the 1980s and 90s, in dramatic secret airlifts known as Operation Moses and Operation Solomon, tens of thousands of Beta Israel were flown out of famine and civil war and brought home to Israel. So is this the lost tribes, found at last? Historians are careful here. The Beta Israel's own tradition does not actually claim descent from the 10 tribes exiled in 722 BC. Their story runs on a separate, older thread of its own. A real, ancient, and remarkable Jewish community reunited with Israel against extraordinary odds. Just, most likely, not this particular mystery's missing piece. Not every claim on the lost tribes has been this careful, or this innocent. In 19th century Britain, a theory took hold that would travel much further than the evidence ever justified. British Israelism proposed that the Anglo-Saxon peoples of Britain, and by extension much of northern Europe, were themselves the literal descendants of the lost 10 tribes, wandering west across the centuries until they reached the British Isles. Believers pointed to word origin theories, symbolic readings of ancient monuments, and highly selective readings of prophecy, insisting the throne of Britain itself sat on the unbroken line of ancient Israel's own kings. Mainstream historians, linguists, and geneticists reject the theory outright. There is no credible evidence connecting Anglo-Saxon ancestry to ancient Israel, and the linguistic arguments used to support it have been dismantled by scholars for over a century. The theory did not stay harmless, either. Later offshoots twisted it into openly racist ideologies in both Britain and the United States, a reminder of how a comforting story, unchecked, can be bent toward something far uglier than curiosity. So, not Pashtuns confirmed, not Ethiopia's community as this specific tribe, and certainly not a 19th century British theory built on wishful reading. If the mystery has an answer at all, we may already be looking right past it. Because there is one group whose connection to the Northern Kingdom is not a matter of tradition, legend, or genetics at all. It is a matter of continuous, unbroken, physical presence in the land itself. The Samaritans. Remember the Israelites too poor or too useful to deport, the ones left behind on the land when the rest were marched away? Their descendants, intermarried with the settlers Assyria brought in, never left. They are still there today. A small community, a few hundred strong, still living around the region of ancient Samaria, still keeping their own version of the Torah, still holding their own Passover sacrifice on their own sacred mountain, exactly as their ancestors did. It is not the full 10 tribes. It is a fragment, mixed and diminished. But of every group in this story, the Samaritans are the only one whose thread to the Northern Kingdom never actually broke. Modern science has tried to settle the wider question too, and the results are more honest than satisfying. Genetic studies of Jewish populations worldwide do show shared ancient Near Eastern ancestry across many communities, evidence of a real common origin far back in time. But no study has ever isolated a distinct genetic signature that specifically marks someone as a descendant of the 10 tribes exiled in 722 BC, as opposed to any other ancient population of the region. The deportees mixed, over long centuries, into so many surrounding populations, Assyrian, Median, Babylonian, and later Persian and far beyond, that any single genetic trace of them may simply be diluted past the point modern science can ever isolate it. That is, itself, a kind of answer. Not a hidden tribe waiting to be found intact somewhere. A people absorbed so completely into humanity around them that they may now be, in small unmeasurable fragments, almost everywhere and nowhere at once. And maybe that is exactly why this story refuses to fade after 27 centuries. It taps into something bigger than one ancient kingdom. Every one of us descends, eventually, from people whose names, languages, and stories did not survive. The 10 tribes just happened to be a case where scripture wrote down that the disappearance happened and dared us to ask why. It is a very old, very human fear that a people, a name, a whole way of life, could simply stop existing, and the world would barely notice. And it is a very old, very human hope, too, that maybe, somewhere, some thread of them survived after all, waiting only to be recognized. That hope is why the Bnei Menashe crossed a continent on the strength of a story. It is why Ethiopia's ancient community was carried home by night. It is why a Victorian theory, however wrong, still found millions willing to believe it. So where does that leave the actual historical record, the one written not in longing, but in cuneiform and stone? Here is the honest, unglamorous answer historians actually give. The 10 tribes were not hidden away intact in some secret valley, waiting centuries to be rediscovered whole. They were deported to real, documented places, Harar, Gozan, the cities of the Medes, exactly as scripture recorded, and on this part, the ancient record and modern archaeology genuinely agree. But scattered in small groups, cut off from land and temple, surrounded by foreign identity on every side, within 2 or 3 generations they stopped existing as a separate people, absorbed into the wider populations of the Assyrian and Median world around them. Of every later claimant, the Samaritans hold the only unbroken, physical thread back to the land itself, small, mixed, but never actually gone. The Bnei Menashe and the Beta Israel carried real, powerful traditions of connection across centuries and continents, honored in part by modern Israel, though not proven by genetics to be this specific tribe. And British Israelism, the loudest claim of all, turns out to rest on nothing historians can actually verify, a story that traveled far further than its evidence ever could. 10 tribes did not vanish by magic, and they were not preserved untouched somewhere waiting. They were unmade, slowly, deliberately, by an empire that understood exactly how to erase a people without a single sword doing the work. That is a harder ending than the legends offer. But it is also, in its own quiet way, more remarkable that anything of them survived at all, even scattered, even mixed, even entirely unrecognizable, is its own kind of quiet endurance. So the 10 tribes were not lost the way a key is lost, waiting somewhere to be found. They were dissolved into Assyria, into Media, into the wider human story, carried forward in pieces too small for any record, any test, any tradition to ever fully gather back together. 27 long centuries later, we can name exactly where they were originally taken. We can trace fragments of what may be left of them in hill villages, highland churches, and disputed theories scattered clear across the globe. What we cannot do, and may never do, is bring them back together. 10 whole tribes of ancient Israel walked into recorded history, and quietly dissolved into all of us, scattered, unrecognized, and yet somehow never quite entirely gone.